on gender-based violence. And we're encouraging you to share your thoughts throughout this session with the White House Gender Policy Council. So just a few things. Today's
Casa
session
Blanca, sus ideas.
and all registrants will receive a copy of the recording, both in English and in Spanish, a copy of the PowerPoint slides, and then the video recordings will be posted to NCADV's YouTube channel within about a week. So it takes us a couple of days to get all that information together and out to you. So please just watch your inboxes for that information. Additionally, ASL translation is going to be provided today through Enterprise. The translator's videos will be available throughout the session, and we're going to pin them to the video board as we go. So welcome, Rosie. We're so thrilled to have you. Spanish translation will also be provided throughout the session by TNOLA languages. And we're going to move on to a slide that will direct people how to join in Spanish and listen in Spanish if you wish to do so. So all the text translation has been created through the free version of the translator, DeepL Translator. So I apologize in advance if there are errors or things that are confusing for those of you who read and understand Spanish as I do not. But hopefully we put as much information as possible on the screen. There will be some pieces that we were not able to translate into Spanish just because Zoom specifically limits the characters that we are allowed. So, but we've done our best and hopefully the slides will help with that. So, each of you
Muy bien. Aquí deben de tener el...
That will enable you to choose the language that you wish to listen to the listening session. And so to listen in English, you click on the globe, you select English, and then you mute the original audio. To listen in Spanish, you do the same. You click on the globe, you select Spanish, and then you mute the original audio. So TNOLA, if you're on here and I misspoke, please correct me now. All right, again, this is your time and we encourage you to use the chat box liberally throughout this entire session. So feel free to share what you want. Tell us how the weather is. Tell us, what your favorite cookie is. Please be sure to respond to all poll questions. We're going to be surveying your thoughts throughout the session. We also have a few specific questions which we'll be asking of you throughout the session, and we encourage you to please use the chat box when prompted to do that. And we ask pardon for this ahead of time, but because we're so tight on time today, we're not going to be holding a Q&A session. But if you have specific questions, please enter those in the chat box. We'll also be watching the Q&A box, but we probably won't be able to respond to all the questions today. We will do our best to answer what we can post-session. All right, so I'm going to do just a quick couple of polls to see who is participating today and where you're from. So if you could please let us know how you self-identify. Are you an advocate working within a local program, a survivor, first responder, you work in the legal field, medical field, government, mental health field, whatever. If you don't see your role here, please feel free to enter in the chat box because we are very curious to know who's with us today. All right, and we have a fantastic audience. Okay, I'm going to close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, so we've got a good spattering of everyone, mostly DBSA advocates, folks in the legal field, government, mental health field, student, others, gun violence prevention, faith, state coalition, TA provider, all kinds. So thank you all. That's wonderful. All right, next, where are you located? And tried to break this up by states. And okay, some of these are a little debatable, but please let us know if you're located in the East, South, Midwest, West. Other, if you identify with other. Ooh, Guam, we have someone from Guam. That's fabulous. Okay, I'm going to close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Most of y'all are from the East Coast. Just a few of you from the South. Fabulous. All right. Well, welcome everyone. We're very happy to have you today. All right. So now I am going to turn over the session to our leader, Ruth Glenn, President and CEO of NCADV, and she's going to tell you just a little bit about NCADV. You're muted.
Good morning, everyone. I am so thrilled to have all of you be a part of this, and really, as Gretchen said, this is your opportunity to share with our colleagues, Rosie Hidalgo and Carrie Betterger Lopez, who I also consider dear friends. And for them to make the time for this opportunity for you is great. And we hope to have more of these types of listening sessions as we move forward into the future, and not just with our dear friends Rosie and Carrie, but for other folks in the administration as we move forward, really informing the work that needs to be done from a federal perspective. As you all know, or may not know, the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence is 40 years old. It was started, so the rumor goes, 40 years ago by women who did not feel like the issue of battered women was addressed as it should be, not only from an administration or a federal perspective, but also from a grassroots perspective. And those grassroots advocates took their energy efforts and really began to do the work of ensuring safety and issues for domestic violence victims were addressed. We are survivor-led. I am a survivor myself. We have ensured, particularly since I've been here over the 7 years, that all of our work has a survivor-centric perspective. So our board is even comprised of survivors, and we're very proud of that. And according to our bylaws, actually, we are not a direct service provider. I think that there are many misnomers out there that we provide direct services. We do not, but we are very, very proud and energetic about the work that we provide, programming that we provide to advocates and others who serve domestic violence victims and survivors. It's very critical that advocates get what they need to get the job done. It's a tough job. And so I always say, we have advocates back. Last but not least, we have a mission that also wants to make sure that we address all of the issues that allow for domestic violence to still continue. Everything from dealing with issues of racism and dealing with issues of patriarchy and dealing with issues of classism. So with our allies in the field of work of violence against women, we're very, very proud to be a part of addressing those issues. With all of that said, this is a great segue to introducing Rosie, and turning it over to Gretchen so she can do the introductions for our, I would say esteemed, but our lovely guests.
Quickly, I want to just, Rosie, give us a few more minutes and then we will happily introduce you. I would like to bring on Rachel Graber for a quick minute, who is our Director of Public Policy, to just share quickly what our Public Policy Office does.
Thanks, Gretchen. So NCADV's Public Policy Office is located in Washington, D.C. And focuses on influencing federal policy to meet the needs of survivors and the advocates who serve them, right? We work with Congress, with federal agencies, with the White House, including with Rosie and Carrie, and with national organizations, both within and without the gender-based violence field, to work towards NCADV's mission, which is a national culture in which we are all safe, empowered, and free from domestic violence. So I want to take this opportunity to echo Ruth and to thank Rosie and Carrie for joining us. We really appreciate your commitment to ensuring the grassroots is involved in developing the National Action Plan, as well as everything else you do for survivors. And I also want to thank each and every one of you who are here today, and particularly those who respond to our calls to action and reach out to your members of Congress to ask them to support critical legislation. In the end, no matter how good a policy is, it's the voices of the grassroots that really take bills over the finish line. So thank you.
Wonderful.
Okay,
Thanks
Gretchen,
so
back
much,
to you.
Rachel. Thank you. Okay, we're going to take just another quick minute to ask you all a few questions, because as we have iterated again and again, this session is meant for you to share your thoughts. And we do have specific questions that we hope will help guide those conversations. So, I'm sorry, let me catch up with myself. All right, in the chat box. So what intersections do you feel need to be addressed in the National Action Plan? So if you could please share your thoughts in the chat box, and we'll just give folks a minute to do that. Please go ahead and do so. So Gordon, I don't know if you're hearing me, please see Carrie's note in the chat box.
Yes.
You can please take care of that too. Thank you. It's really wonderful to have someone who knows what they're doing on this session as well. All right, wonderful. Thank you all. Continue sharing that. I'm also going to launch a poll now. Again, this is a section where we weren't able to add the choices in Spanish, but I'm hoping this slide will help guide the conversation. So when addressing gender-based violence, what interventions other than prevention, education, and increased funding for victim legal services are most important? It's multiple choice, so you're welcome to choose. You know, we suggest 3, but feel free to choose how many you feel are quite important to this conversation. Okay. All right, please share. We've got over 100 people on the call and not even half of you have shared. So I'm going to give you just another minute. I know it takes a minute to think through these, so forgive my rushing. Okay, great. All right, I'm going to let it go till 75%. We're at 69. Okay, just a couple more if you could. I'm going to close the poll here in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let me show these results. So this, I think, is quite fascinating. Of course, access to housing, economic supports, alternatives to the legal system, stronger laws to prevent gun access, prevention programming. All these are wonderful. Of course, we're going to be sharing all of this with Rosie and Carrie following with this fantastic information. Okay. So now I would like to introduce our fantastic guests, Rosie Hidalgo and Carrie Bettinger-Lopez. I'm going to take just a minute to read a few pieces of each of your bios, and forgive me in advance, we don't have time to go through them all, and your accolades are amazing, but I'll share just a few. So Rosie has worked in the movement to end gender-based violence for over 25 years as a public interest attorney and as a national policy advocate. Most recently, she was the Senior Director of Public Policy for Casa de Esperanza, National Latina Network for Healthy Families and Communities, a national resource center with focus on providing training, research, and policy advocacy to prevent and end domestic violence and sexual assault. Currently, Rosie serves as Special Agent to the President and Senior Advisor on Gender-Based Violence at the White House Gender Policy Council. Carrie Bettinger Lopez is a professor of law and is the director-founder of the Human Rights Clinic and Human Rights Program at the University of Miami Law School. She is currently also serving as Special Advisor to the White House Gender Policy Council, where she is assisting with the development of a national action plan to end gender-based violence. While serving in the federal government, she is taking leave of absence from her role as an adjunct senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. From 2015 to 2017, she served in the Obama-Biden administration as White House advisor on violence against women, senior advisor to the president, to Vice President Joe Biden, and member of the White House Council on Women and Girls. So both of their bios are much longer than that, and their accomplishments are amazing. So I will now turn this over to the two of you, and thank you so very much.
Thank you so much, Gretchen, for that introduction. Thank you, Ruth. It's so lovely to see you, and Rachel, for all you're doing on the policy front, and really for all of you. It's just so wonderful to have this opportunity to connect today. And I appreciate that you're taking the time from your busy schedule, and so grateful for all the work that all of you are doing on the front lines every day on behalf of survivors. And just, on behalf of this administration, the Biden-Harris administration, that, has such high priorities for really moving us forward as a nation to address and prevent domestic violence and all forms of gender-based violence. I extend gratitude on behalf of the whole administration to all of you. And it's an honor to be here with you today. And I'm just going to briefly give you a little bit more background on this White House Gender Policy Council and the national strategy we're working on, and then turn it over to Carrie to talk a little bit more about the National Action Plan on GBV. And then, of course, we're eager to get your input and recommendations. So as Gretchen mentioned, I'm serving as Special Assistant to the President in the White House Gender Policy Council, and then specifically a Senior Advisor on Gender-Based Violence as well. And this is really exciting. It's the first ever White House Gender Policy Council that has not existed in the past. And this really came about because of the field of, and in particular, a whole range of individuals across many different sectors working to advance women's rights that really said it's critical to have a White House Gender Policy Council that is working both domestically and globally to look at our nation's policies and collaborate with the Domestic Policy Council, the National Economic Council, the National Security Council, and others at that level to really make sure that we are integrating a whole of government approach to what it means to advance gender equity and gender equality. So President Biden signed an executive order on March 8th, International Women's Day, creating this first ever White House Gender Policy Council, and called on us to work with everyone across the government and with critical input from external stakeholders to develop a national strategy of what that means to center gender equity and gender equality, and to do that at the intersection with a lot of other really important commitments, including the commitment to advancing racial equity, the commitment to addressing and making sure we're protecting the rights of LGBTQ individuals and others across different underserved or marginalized communities, really centering what it means to do this work in that proactive manner. So the EO tasked us with developing this national strategy within 200 days, which I can tell you falls on next Friday, September 24th. So we have been counting down as we have been working in a very robust manner, and it's just really been a great opportunity. We have senior designates across every federal agency and component who are designates to this Gender Policy Council. And it's just been wonderful to see the enthusiasm from so many of our federal colleagues across government for what it means to have this opportunity to think about creating this national strategy on gender equity and gender equality. And in that process, we've been convening federal work groups and also convening a lot of external stakeholder engagement. So I'm grateful to NCADV and others who've been a part of that process. And so as we prepare to roll that out, it's hard within that limited frame of a national strategy that's a much higher 30,000-foot level overview to really dig deep enough into GBV, but definitely gender-based violence is going to be one of the 10 key strategic priorities in that national strategy on gender equity, and recognizing that it intersects with so many other issues, as you all know, and as you pointed out in your poll, economic security being first and foremost, right? A critical component of that, as well as access to healthcare, so education. So all these different pieces that are part of a larger national strategy clearly also intersect and overlap with critical issues on gender-based violence. But I'm happy to say that the executive order also called for, in the process of developing an implementation plan for the national strategy, specifically said, we need to also develop our nation's first ever national action plan on gender-based violence. So that's where we're beginning now to roll out what will be a much more robust, comprehensive, whole of government lens to what does it mean to have a national action plan on gender-based violence, and to also update our global strategy. There is a global strategy to prevent and respond to gender-based violence that was developed during the Obama administration in 2012 and updated in 2016. But this is also an opportunity to lift that up, update it, and better integrate our domestic and global commitments across these issues. So I want to highlight and thank you all for all the work you're currently doing on policy issues. We all got VOCA across the finish line together, and I know NCADV played a huge role, and all of you, the work you do to really inform policymakers is huge. And we're all working on VAWA reauthorization and remain hopeful and confident that that can be accomplished in a bipartisan manner, as well as the Family Violence Prevention Services Act reauthorization. So all of those we're engaged every day in trying to get across the finish line, but we recognize those are pillars and important ones, but now we're excited to also put that in context within a much broader national action plan on GBV. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Carrie to talk about our efforts to advance that goal and the critical role that each of you play in that effort. So thank you, and Carrie, over to you.
Thanks, Rosie. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you to NCADV for organizing such an important listening session. We're really excited to hear from everybody. So I'm going to speak very quickly because I want to, well, I'm not going to speak quickly, but I'm going to, because that wouldn't be good for many people, but we will try to get to your comments as quickly as possible. So I want to just quickly run through this this PowerPoint. This is a PowerPoint that we've put together that just gives you some images of what we're talking about here. So if you could advance to the next slide, please. Great. This is the executive order Rosie was just referring to, and these slides will be provided to you, hopefully, by NCADV afterwards, and everything has a link. So if you're interested in checking out the executive order, which I highly recommend, there's a link here, and you can see here's the language about establishing the National Action Plan to End Gender-Based Violence, which is the subject of today's listening session. Next slide, please. Just one back. Sometimes it skips ahead, I know. So these are just some images from national action plans in other countries, as well as a handbook from the United Nations. If you're interested in checking out how other countries have dealt with this, Australia is actually on its 4th iteration of its 12-year National Action Plan on Violence Against Women and Their Children. South Africa has developed a National Action Plan that they released in the past year that goes into a very deep dive connecting issues such as apartheid and gender-based violence. Uruguay, Finland, and actually 78 countries across the world have national action plans on gender-based violence. So we are very excited that the United States is about to, become one of this group of now 79. Next slide, please. These are some images from other U.S. national action plans or strategies on gender-based violence as it relates to global gender-based violence. So as Rosie said, we're really excited to be linking our work and thinking about global gender-based violence globally with gender-based violence domestically, really cultivating a transnational conversation amongst advocates and amongst governments to better understand not only the nature of the problem, but responses to it, so that we can learn from partners overseas and have exchanges that really we haven't necessarily been engaged with in the past. And these are very exciting opportunities, I think, also for advocates and survivors in the U.S. who haven't always been engaged in these transnational conversations to do a deeper dive in that sense. So this is kind of a bigger picture. Next slide, please. And these are some images from national action plans that focus on various different issues, both within the US and with as it relates to abroad. You can see the first two involve trafficking and HIV/AIDS strategies that the US has developed. And I commend these to you because we will be looking to these, obviously, for thinking about our own structure and format. And next slide, please. And finally, just to locate this within a larger global conversation, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are a set of goals, and Goal 5 is focuses on gender equality and empowerment of women and girls. And so we connect this initiative that we're involved with those UN Sustainable Development Goals. And we are also excited to connect it with the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, which many of you, I'm sure, are very involved with every year. And those 16 days go from November 25th to December 10th. They end on Human Rights Day, December 10th. And we're actively thinking about ways in which we can connect the development of this National Action Plan with those 16 days of activism. And then, of course, International Women's Day is on March 8th. And so we're also looking at that as a potential target in the future. So you can stop the slideshow now. And just as we transition into hearing from all of you, the last thing I want to just say and underscore is that the more concrete your recommendations can be about connecting problems that you have observed or experiences that you've had with concrete policy directions that you'd like to see the federal government moving in, law, policy, initiatives, that is very helpful for us because as we're coming up with an action plan, we want it to contain action items and concrete, measurable outcomes that we can develop. So whether it's through your oral interventions today or written interventions that you might submit after this, again, we're really interested in getting concrete about where you see your ideas actually getting enacted in law and policy. And it could be existing law and policy, or it could be new. And so we encourage you to both connect it with, again, things that are already in existence, but also to dream big and to tell us kind of where you think your ideas can hit the pavement and see action in the future. So with that, thank you again, and we're looking forward to hearing from you.
Wonderful. We have a lot of people sharing in the chat box. I don't know if you each have access to that. And we are doing very well on time. So if you're welcome to share other thoughts at this moment, or if you see a few things that you want to respond to, we welcome you to do that. All right, wonderful. So now, as many of you know, I think most people probably saw the survey that we sent out to the field, encouraging people to volunteer to share their thoughts live during this session, but also to share via that survey. So again, we will be sharing that information there with Carrie and Rosie following this session, and we'll be sending out a bit of a different survey to each of you who are on this call to share thoughts, to share more thoughts. This is fantastic information, and we've been getting such a great amount of info from you as you are sharing your thoughts. So now we're going to move into the 6 people that we've selected to share their thoughts live. Today, they were selected from different parts of the country, and we have a whole smattering of the United States represented. So Randy, Pallavi, Danny, Erica, McKibben, Caitlin, and Erica Olson, if you would please turn on your videos, and we will move into your thoughts. So Randy, if you wouldn't mind starting us off.
First of all, thank you so much for the opportunity, and thank you, Rosie and Carrie, for being here to listen and for your leadership for these many years. My name is Randy Bregman. I use the pronouns she, her, and hers. I am the co-executive director in a shared leadership model at Vera House in Syracuse, New York. We're a comprehensive domestic violence and sexual assault agency. And I have loved trying to follow the chat because I think a few of the things that I hope to talk about today have been raised in the chat. And I'm thinking that I'm just amplifying some of those voices. And one was making sure that we enhance the focus on primary prevention work. I think particularly in the age of COVID, there's been a lot of reactivity to the nature of the crisis and the need to respond immediately for housing and economic needs. But often it takes a little bit of deeper thinking and a real commitment to looking at how we back things up, to look at primary prevention and culture change. So I think whatever comes out of this, I'm hoping that action items are really focusing on successful models of primary prevention and enhancing those throughout the country so that we can see the focus shift to hopefully eventually stop violence before it occurs and have a model of healthy, respectful relationships for people wherever they turn. One thing that I think at this point in my journey in the field, I've been with Fair House 31 years, so a good length of the time that our agency has been open. And in the last several years, we've really committed ourselves to a much deeper dive into anti-racism, anti-oppression work. And I think in order to really begin to do that, one of the hard truths that we have had to face is our organization as well as our movement. It really has a foundation in white supremacy and systemic racism that we did not attend to when we founded the movement. And I think we need to put particular emphasis. And I saw Ted Bunch and others talking about margin of the margins, whose voices haven't been at the table. How do we elevate those voices, not only in raising up the voices, but in ensuring that funding is directed to organizations that might have fewer resources for writing grants and doing that work, but to really looking at a much deeper commitment to anti-racism, anti-oppression work. And that extends to the issues I saw some people raise around gender and inclusivity for people who don't identify on the gender binary, for those who may be male victims, making sure that we're including all of that in our thinking. And I have 20 seconds left. So in my last point, we have a wonderful sexual harassment policy in New York State, although our governor resigned due to his own sexual harassment. There is a policy that is very extensive and requires all employers to have policies and training. And it would be wonderful to consider having something like that on the national level. And thank you very much for the time and opportunity today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Randy. Pallavi, if you would please share now, that would be great.
Hello, everyone. It's such a pleasure and honor to be here with you. My name is Pallavi Dewan, and I am the Director of Domestic Violence Policy for the Los Angeles City Attorney's Office. My office prosecutes misdemeanor crimes of intimate partner violence. Like many states, the California Penal Code criminalizes human trafficking, but not coercive control, despite significant overlap between the liberty deprivations inherent in both. Coercive control is a persistent, ongoing pattern of conduct that interferes with a person's right to autonomy. Tactics include extreme isolation, deprivation of basic needs and resources, and constant monitoring and controlling of another person's movements. Coercive control is usually gendered in nature, drawing upon societal gender inequities and replicating these in an intimate relationship in order to subordinate the victim. In 2020, my office sponsored Senate Bill 1141, authored by Senator Susan Rubio, and the product of collaboration between my office, the California Partnership to End Domestic Violence, and the Family Violence Appellate Project, among other stakeholders. The bill added coercive control to the Family Code definition of domestic abuse and went into law this year. Other states have since followed suit, including Connecticut, and international movements have produced criminal laws in the UK. In fact, we borrowed from Scotland's law in developing SB 1141. Now, in creating new law, we want to be as consistent as possible so that we avoid geographic disparities in definitions and remedies granted by the law. Because every jurisdiction is unique, every state should investigate how to best incorporate coercive control into their laws based on their jurisdiction's needs, using the same overarching definition in the interest of capturing the harm precisely. But creating new law is just the beginning. Any law depends on education for successful implementation. To be effective, survivors should receive education on how to benefit from laws that codify coercive control, whether in the family or criminal codes. And judges, lawyers, and other professionals in the field should undergo training on new laws. As we move forward in identifying and codifying coercive control, the law can begin to elevate the most serious cases of abuse. This will allow us to create tailored responses that distinguish between the identification, treatment, and punishment of one-time offenders versus the serial abusers who inflict power and control through a perpetual course of conduct involving near total domination of another person's autonomy. In the criminal setting, the focus of this case inquiry should include an examination of underlying motivations and power dynamics in less severe misdemeanor cases, where physical injury is sometimes minimal, but the victim still faces significant danger. Thank you.
Thank you, Pallavi. Okay, Danny Lapointe.
Hello. My name is Danny Lapointe. I am a bisexual, genderqueer PhD student in public policy and social change at Union Institute and University. I'm also a survivor of intimate partner violence and of sexual violence. I currently live just outside of Minneapolis. When asked what critical supports and policies the National Action Plan should include to best empower victims and survivors, I've identified 3 top priorities. First, providing funding for the implementation of domestic abuse centers that focus on providing holistic programming to every member of the family. Such programs recognize that intimate partner violence is part of a larger systemic issue and that the reach of domestic violence is intergenerational. These holistic services would include case management, advocacy services for survivors, as well as advocacy services for any children in the family who have experienced or witnessed intimate partner violence. Victim survivor groups, victim survivor individual therapy, caregiver support for child victims and witnesses of intimate partner violence, youth group therapy and youth individual therapy, intervention and prevention programs, including prevention groups working with teenagers to build foundations of safe and healthy intimate partner relationships, and intervention groups working directly with people who have historically used violence in their relationships. Secondly, fully funded legal representation to victims of intimate partner violence who are obtaining orders for protection, as well as for family court matters, specifically custody disputes where intimate partner violence has been identified, and a nationally consistent curriculum for the training of judicial officials working within family court and/or domestic abuse court. This curriculum would focus on understanding the dynamics of abuse, dismantling myths about abuse cycles and myths about victims. It would assist judicial officials in understanding the dynamics that they may see unfolding in their courtrooms and equip them with trauma-informed responses. The curriculum would also educate on risk factors and needs specific to victims of intimate partner violence, including increased judicial understanding of ways that abuse and coercion can manifest, and awareness of increased risk factors such as the presence of previous incidents of non-fatal strangulation. Third, financial assistance to cover all the basic needs and living expenses for a set number of months for victims and survivors who are leaving or have just recently left an abusive situation. This funding would allow survivors time to focus on safety, legal needs, mental health, and it would allow time to attend advocacy meetings, financial literacy classes, and other resources that are aimed at creating a stable new foundation. This funding would need to include access to the services that I just listed, as well as assistance with transportation for people who have a financial or geographic barrier to accessing these services, including providing the option for safe virtual services if in-person services were not available or accessible. Thank you for your time.
Wonderful, thank you, Danny. Okay, Erica McKibben.
Yes, hi. I'm going to apologize in advance. I'm at work in the office, so the phone may ring. This work, as we know, is nonstop, unfortunately. My name is Erica McKibben. My pronouns are she and her. I am the Outreach Support Services Advocate at Clayton County Association Against Family Violence. Our shelter is known as Securus House in Marlow, Georgia. And I'm going to talk a perspective coming from a frontline worker. I've done this work in the military as a civilian, and I'm still doing it now with a nonprofit. And over my 10 years, unfortunately, I see the same issues when it comes to helping survivors, from underrepresentation and to the financial assistance. But the three things that were important to me was definitely mental health is totally important. I don't think it should be a privilege or a right anymore. I see it every day in my work. The victims, men, women, kids, transgender, we need to make sure that victims are getting counseling, but getting counseling for someone who they feel comfortable with, not just a go down to the street referral to a place. I also think it's highly important for kids to get counseling. Sometimes we overlook the children, and they need counseling just as much as the mothers and the fathers, because as we know, they have to get help with the trauma that they've endured. Also, I would like to see just more assistance with having better supportive housing programs. I know there's not a lot of people here from the South, which I'm disappointed to see, but there needs to be more supportive programs. As what I do, we do refer people to housing programs. Unfortunately, there's a huge housing shortage going on everywhere in the United States. And that's something that is a little bit hurtful, because you want to be able to refer people to something with supportive housing. And I don't just mean an apartment, I mean having wraparound services as well, especially when it comes to transgender, LGBTQ community. There's not that many supportive housing programs out there. That needs to be more publicized and more out there for those population. And I also just want to make sure that there is more funding and resources to provide vital services for victims, such as relocation, childcare. I know for me, working with our clients, we do the best we can here. We service, we're probably 95% of our clientele are African-American women that we deal with. And sometimes I feel we don't get the same funding like we should. And that's something that I really want people to understand, that to be able to provide services for individuals, we have to be able to have that funding available. So with the Bow Wow and all the funding that, unfortunately, I don't want to get too political, but we just need to make sure that none of that stuff is cut, because we're already working with what we got. And that's something that's very important, because I don't want to see anybody else get left behind. And as we know with COVID, that has, we've done the best we can to keep things rolling. And I just want to see those fundings to continue. So that's my input. And I really thank you so much for having us be able to talk and having us here.
Thank you, Erica. Okay, Caitlin.
All right. So hi, before I start, I also want to say thank you for having me as a panelist. It's an honor to get to talk on this. So the first topic that came to mind when I was responding to the survey that was sent out was violence against Native women, but I really have to emphasize that as a non-Native person, it's not like my place to make a full statement on this. So I really do have to thank also Ty Simpson from the Idaho Coalition Against Sexual and Domestic Violence for her guidance on how to approach this as an advocate. Just for reference on the issue of violence against Native women, like we know that violence disproportionately affects Indigenous women and communities. For some statistics, according to the Association of Indian Affairs in 2017, over 4 in 5 American Indian and Alaska Native women have experienced violence in their lifetime. Study by Dr. Andre B. Rose that was funded by the National Institute of Justice in 2016 found that 66.5% of women and 26% of men expressed concern for their safety. So this is obviously a big issue. Missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in particular is an issue that deserves special attention. And again, like referring back to what Ty Simpson said, I just like encourage the council to like engage with Indigenous advocates and organizers to speak for themselves on this issue, because their leadership in it is essential to addressing the violence that they experience. I will be sharing like a copy of my thoughts with the coalition with the intention that Ty Simpson in particular, her contact information is passed on for follow-up on this as well, just because that is one leader in our community that is great with this, and it's her place to do it. My second thought, based on my experience as a youth advocate, is that there's not consistent comprehensive sex education curriculum. The lack of this can influence understanding not only of sexual health, but also questions about like what is consent, what constitutes sexual violence, gender-based violence, how to access health resources. It puts populations at risk for disease, unplanned pregnancies, dangerous abortion attempts, other health problems related to sex and relationships. And they continue to be kind of unaddressed because of the lack of this comprehensive education. So encouraging consistent curriculum and educational guidelines in every state in regards to sex ed would reduce those risks. Thirdly, just mental health resources. I think that Erica McKibben said it better than me, but like they do need to be more accessible, especially for marginalized groups, especially youth, in regard to their, they're young, and also senior populations, regardless of any part of their identity that would make them a vulnerable population. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you, Caitlin. Okay, Erica Olson, please.
Hi, I am Erica Olson. I am calling in from Austin, Texas. And right as I dialed in after our practice session, my internet went down. So you know what, y'all? Whether it's winter or summer, y'all can't trust the Texas grid. I am a survivor. I am the former director of the New Jersey Domestic Violence Fatality and Near Fatality Review Board. And after 20 years of just doing really soup to nuts in gender-based violence advocacy and services, I'm currently a consultant on GBV and trauma. And so I bring my perspectives as both a survivor and a 20-year veteran in this field, basically on 2 points I wanted to emphasize today, and particularly from a conservative state perspective when you're doing policy. One is looking at firearms. I think you all know the connection between guns, IPV, and lethality, and the importance of regulations and licensure. But particularly for conservative pro-gun states like Texas, enforce the enforcement, right? In particular, in these states where they're going to fight regulation and licensure tooth and nail for you, look at enforcement provisions, particularly for firearm surrender and for non-possession court orders, as well as looking at some penalties for both non-enforcement by members of the criminal justice system and enhanced sentencing when abusers aren't compliant. It's also really important, in addition to lethality, I think when we're talking about that coercive control. You know, in conservative states in Texas where gun ownership is cheap and easy and prevalent, it's just the menace of having a firearm in the household that's enough of an unspoken threat that coerces and controls and entraps women and girls in horrifically abusive relationships. And I think that entrapment really leads me to my second focus that I'd love to see become really a predominant focus in the National Action Plan, and that is that entrapment. I would love to see funding and implementation vulnerability of survivors, of women and girls, and really reduces the dependency on abusers as well as families who may be enabling or perpetuating that abuse. National funding and implementation is really crucial in conservative states like Texas because legislators in conservative states frequently reject those state initiatives. And they often also reject federal funding for programs that have a disproportionate impact on women and girls. Like, for example, in Texas, not rolling out Medicaid and expanding that option. So what would that look like in terms of policy? I'd love to see the low cost or pro bono legal representation in civil and family courts that was mentioned earlier, I believe by Danny, start to finish, separation, custody, asset division, divorce, as well as culturally and linguistically appropriate and trauma-informed representation for immigrant survivors, particularly when you're looking at the U and the T visas. I'd love to see paid leave and job security, not just in general, but specifically for pursuing safety and healing options, right? So what I'm talking about here is paid leave and job security for court dates, appointments with attorneys, investigators, being able to see your doctor or your therapist. We have to be able to provide access to that. And women shouldn't have to choose between being able to pay the bills, going to court, or healing from the trauma. It looks like free or low cost quality childcare so that victims of domestic violence or human trafficking aren't dependent on either pimps or those in the family that might be enabling their abuser to watch their children. It looks like affordable, safe, and quality and stable semi-permanent or permanent housing. It looks like affordable insurance options that offer comprehensive coverage. And we cannot leave the state of Texas without talking about guaranteed access to free and low-cost reproductive health care, and that includes abortion and contraception, so that when we're looking at reproductive coercion and control, we are saving lives and we're breaking intergenerational trauma. And so I say thank you for your patience with my technical assistance, my accent, and thanks for having us.
Oh my gosh, thank you. Thank each of you, Randy, Pallavi, Danny, both the Ericas and Caitlin. Each of you are just rock stars. Can't thank you enough. Okay, so we are actually doing really well on time. I'm going to move into another poll. This one is specific to, aside from funding for victim services, which of the following do you consider to be in the top 3? So for prioritizing resources, funding, person-powered technical assistance, etc. And please choose up to 3. Again, for those of you who may be attending the Spanish version, I'm hoping this slide helps guide your answers to the poll. And I apologize that we weren't able to translate these questions within the poll into Spanish. All right, I'm going to give you all just another minute here. All right, we have about half of you who have answered. We've got over 100 people still left on this session. So if you haven't done so already, please share. All right, so I'm going to be closing the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And I'll share these results. Okay, so it looks like access to affordable housing and housing assistance, healthcare, safety net programs, cash assistance, increased training for judges, law enforcement, child protective services, prosecutors, etc. Hiring more advocates to guide victims through various systems, implementing multidisciplinary approaches in communities, supporting community-based alternatives to the legal system, and removing firearms from prohibited abusers. But yeah, it's no surprise that access to affordable housing or housing assistance, healthcare, and safety net programs are the most popular. So thank you very much. All right, we have one last question that we would like you to answer within the chat box. Please let us know what recommendations you have for the White House as they develop the National Action Plan. So this can include content, processes, or any other recommendations that you wish to share. Wonderful. All right, I encourage you to use the chat box. You all have been a fabulous audience. I've loved seeing all the comments come through in the chat box. This is just incredible information. Housing, housing, housing. Yes, unrestricted funding. I love that. All right. And we still have a few minutes. So Rosie, Carrie, I don't know if you have other thoughts to share with our audience today. I'm happy to turn this back over to you for a few more minutes. We've got about 5 more minutes left in this session, or we can move on. Accessible immigration lawyers, that's a good one. I think that's fantastic.
Yes, well, this is Rosie. Can you hear me okay, Gretchen?
Yes.
Okay, great. Again, I want to thank you all so much. I want to thank the presenters. That was really fabulous, very impressive. I think you, in a short amount of time, really were able to convey and highlight critical issues and very practical recommendations. And I know, as you all have mentioned, you're lifting up things that many others in this group and around the country share. And want to thank so much all those who shared their comments on the chat as well. And I know NCADV is going to be helping us to collect all that and consolidate it as we're gathering that input. Interestingly, when we had the consultation with South Africa, with Finland, with Argentina, they all highlighted how important this work is, not just by government, but by civil society, by all sectors, right? And so I think that is part of our goal as we're moving forward. How do we continue to highlight the important whole of government approach of the federal government, but the critical role of the state governments, local, territorial, tribal, but then also communities, right? How do we put this work more in the hands of community and all those doing the work on the front line, like GBV advocates, but also others, right? Because across all different sectors, and I think that's something that we're also looking to lift up. And so hopefully the conversations that we're having, it's not just the destination, but the journey, right? And how we're engaging robustly this kind of conversation. So I welcome you all to continue to engage, whether it's in your faith-based communities and your other groups you belong in and families and other ways. How do we really help this become a major goal that everyone sees their role in both preventing and responding, to gender-based violence? And in the context of prevention, I have been heartened that I think our movement is in a paradigm shift, right, that has been occurring over a number of years, to recognize that while we do need to respond and improve our response, that we really do need to go upstream with prevention and doing all that we can ahead of time to build that kind of safe culture of respect where people can thrive, where there's no tolerance, for violence, and where everyone also sees their role in that as well. And those are conversations that I'll share with you that we're also having in the context of the federal government as our nation's largest employer. Like, what does it mean in the federal workspace to really honor diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, and interweave the need to address and prevent any form of sexual harassment way before it gets to the level of severe and pervasive conduct that might cross a legal threshold, right? And there's some actually really good work happening. I've been so heartened to see some key federal agencies that have been ahead of the curve and have some really innovative prevention and bystander programs, leadership engagement, robust ways they're weaving this in. So we're looking to lift up those promising practices and get commitments across all agencies to advance that. So I know we could talk a lot longer, but all this to say that this work is hard. We all know it's hard. And many of us, have been doing it for a super long time, and just honoring the courage, the resilience, the leadership of survivors that have been at the forefront and that have brought this movement to this point. And as we all continue to take it to the next level, I think hope is what keeps us all going, right? Sometimes people are like, because we remain hopeful that we can all together work for that social transformation. And so again, just spending this time with you all today has really been beneficial and continues to build that hope for me. And I'll hand it over to Carrie. Any final comments?
Thank you, Rosie. I echo your sense of hope and inspiration at the same time that we're talking about such challenging, deep, systemic, historical problems. It's people like the people on this call that are working and going to continue to make progress in solving those problems. So I've been monitoring the chat on my second screen on zoom.gov. We don't have access to the chat, but I've logged on separately. And I want to thank everybody for your comments there, as well as to the excellent speakers. And again, to the extent that, there's several comments in the chat that are pointing to specific pieces of legislation or specific language that you'd like to see included in legislation, specific policies, things that are working at the state level, things that aren't working at the state level. The specificity is extremely helpful for us. So we thank you for that, as well as for your larger picture ideas. And the last thing I also want to say is that many of you are connected on the state and local and tribal levels with other subnational governments, with your county or city government, et cetera. And to the extent that you see, the potential for parallel conversations to be happening at the local or state or tribal governmental level, we're very energized by that idea as well, by having kind of the idea of action plans developing, in sync, not just at the federal level, but at other governmental levels as well. So feel free to let NCADV know, or let us know if you think that there are particular places across the country that also might be interested in operationalizing some of these action plans at the local or state or tribal government level. So with that, I just want to again echo Rosie's thanks and her note of hope to that you all have left us with today. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Ruth, do you have any closing thoughts you would like to share?
I put mine in the chat box. So first, I'd like to say thank you to the panelists. And I agree with Rosie, the succinct, clear message and solutions, looking towards solutions, which also means hope, correct? So thank you all so much for being here. NCADV will continue to serve as a liaison and working with you all and your voices and bringing the issues to the forefront, and working with Rosie and Carrie, again, my dear friends, and making sure that this action plan is the best that it can be in action and hope. So thank you all so much.
Wonderful. Again, thank you. Feel free, just a few closing housekeeping issues. If you're not already a member of NCADV, please consider joining. We offer numerous resources there specific to members that you may find of help and interest to your work. Reach out to us at any time. Again, we're going to be populating a specific survey that we'll be sharing within the follow-up email to gather further thoughts, resources, links, information, anything you wish to share with the White House Gender Policy Council. So don't feel that this is the end of the conversation. We will be encouraging people to continue to share their thoughts. Rosie, Carrie, thank you as always. It's wonderful to see you. Personally, I'm thrilled that you are leading this effort with this administration. And yes, my hope has been renewed, and especially knowing that you all are part of that team. So to our speakers, you all are just absolutely rock stars. Thank you so much. Our interpreters on both, everyone is wonderful. Yeah. Thank you so much. Please
interpreters. If I could say one last thing, we would have loved to have seen you all in Washington for the national conference of NCADV. So I'm glad we've had this time together virtually, but look forward to when we can all gather in person. Absolutely. So hopefully in the near future, this time next year, we'll be in person together, if not sooner.
It will. We are certainly working on that. So
special thanks to Gretchen and Rachel for making this happen. The NCADV team worked really hard to make sure that your voices were heard. So just a quick shout out to them as well. I did.
Absolutely.
Thank you. It was a team effort for sure. So everyone, have a fabulous day. We will be in further touch via email. And we look forward to more conversation.
Absolutely.
So take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.